Hey guys, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it might be for you. Actually, as I was preparing for this sermon, I was thinking of all the different places over this coronavirus church era that I've listened to a sermon. Um, I don't think I've ever listened from bed actually, but I've been on the couch, been eating breakfast. Actually, Kara and I listened to a sermon on our way to church when we had an in-person OMC meeting at IFI. So whatever your routine is, whatever wherever you are, glad you're listening. Glad you're a part of our church, and I'm excited to be speaking this morning or evening, again, whatever it might be for you. Our theme this week is joy and peace. It's our third week of Advent. Nita opened it up 2 weeks ago, talking about hope and promise, introducing Advent, talking about some of the hopes and promises that the early church had and their reactions to those. Andrew spoke last week about preparation and waiting. If you remember, we talked about kind of our culture and how we are tuned to be in a hurry for everything, and we don't do a lot of waiting. So this week, like I said, is joy and peace. And I'll be sharing about that. Scott has next week, and so I'm excited to hear how he brings his topic as well. But today I'm going to be talking about Philippians 4 verses 2 through 7 as the text. Actually, I found a sermon on YouTube by Francis Chan, and if you've ever listened to any of his stuff, just a great communicator. So I found a sermon of his called Living with Joy, and it really spoke to me. I was impressed. I liked the things he had to share. So I'm actually taking sort of his outline and some of his ideas. So if you recognize what I'm saying today, it may be because you heard that sermon, or if you have free time and you want to hear a funny, entertaining sermon that has some really good meat to it as far as the content, go to YouTube and look up Living with Joy by Francis Chan. So without further ado, I will get into the text, Philippians 4 verses 2 through 7. Actually, before I do that, I want to tell you what I'm going to be talking about today and just set out a baseline so that you know what's coming, sort of the roadmap. I find that sometimes in a sermon I get lost, so I want to start off by doing that. So basically, I'm going to be talking about 3 commands that we are given out of this passage, and then the reason why we can complete those commands, or that we are equipped to fulfill those commands. So 3 commands and a why. So Philippians 4, verse 2. I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche. I did have to Google how to say those names, and I'm still not sure if I'm getting it right. So I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. So Paul is the writer of Philippians. He's writing to the church in Philippi. And in verse 2, he's writing to 2 women who seem to have a disagreement in the church. And he's saying, hey, guys, you are brothers, sisters in Christ. Work it out, guys. Have a chat. You're on the same team. And he actually tells the church, hey, you're in this too. Help them out. Which is just kind of an interesting note and something to remember when you're reading these letters from Paul. They are letters to real people who are in the church. But I want us to focus in on that last phrase of verse 3. So he's talking about the church, the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are written in the book of life. How often, or when was the last time that you thought about your name being in the book of life? I don't do it often. I'm bringing this up because it sets up that first command. So in verse 4, Paul goes on, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. So that's our first command. So Paul is saying this twice. it's an emphasized point. Rejoice in the Lord. So I want to hop over to, let's see here, Luke 10, verse 20, and point out something something important, I think, that's kind of interesting. Let's see, Luke 10, if I can. Here we are. So in Luke 10, Jesus actually sends out the 72, and these people are carrying out tasks, ministering. They have power over demons, and they're doing some amazing things, ministering in the name of Jesus. And in verse 17 of chapter 10 in Luke, they return, and it says they return with joy, saying, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name." And they said they saw Satan fell like lightning from heaven. Jesus is saying that, but so Jesus replies. I'm messing this up. The 72 come back and they say, "Hey, we have power. We're amazed at this spiritual things that we're doing." And Jesus says, "Yeah, I gave you that power, and you're doing that in my name." But he says, in verse 20, "Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." So I don't think there's any other event that you could argue we as Christians should be more excited about than expelling demons and having spiritual power. Like, that's the pinnacle of earthly activity that you could say is worthy of rejoicing for. And Jesus actually says, "Do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." And that's what Paul's talking about in verse 4. He says in the end of verse 3, "Your names are written in the book of life." In verse 4, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice." So that's our first command. And it is a command. Paul's not giving, it's an imperative command. Paul's not giving any conditions. He's not telling us, hey, if your life's going right, then you can rejoice. And remember, Paul is writing this from prison. He's in chains, and he's given his life for the gospel. He's sacrificed everything for the work of the gospel. And so he's not writing this from a position of lots of power or wealth or comfort. And it's not dependent on our circumstances. And you might also say, well, yeah, but I'm not really a joyful person. And I'm actually that kind of person also. I'm not an outwardly joyful person. But that doesn't work either. As Christians, we gladly accept the responsibility to love the Lord your God with all your heart. We don't really argue against that. That's kind of a given in today's church. So rejoicing in the Lord should be a given as well. We don't say, well, I'm not really a loving person, so I shouldn't have to love the Lord my God with all my heart. We don't say that there. So again, that personality sort of excuse doesn't work here either. This is a command. We are to take it seriously. And I want to emphasize that. So that's our first command. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. It's not about circumstances. So actually, I did want to insert a little story here. Kara and I lived in Canada when we were first married, and we had neighbors at our house. Mike and Patty, they were an older couple, and Patty was the wife, was quite an interesting character. She was a heavy smoker, spent a lot of time out on her front porch smoking, probably, I was trying to think back, I would say like twice an hour at least, like once every half hour or so, she was out there smoking, day or night. I mean, I would be out there shoveling in the dead of winter with snow coming down. It's minus, I guess in Fahrenheit, 10 degrees, between 0 and 10 degrees. Wind is blowing, and she's out there huddled on her porch, taking a smoke. So we learned to watch for her because she was a very, very negative person as well. And so if we were out there coming or going when she was smoking, we'd run into her, and we'd hear why today was not a good day. So we kind of actually ended up trying to avoid her most times. But on one particular occasion, we were, I think, down here in Ohio visiting Kara's family for Christmas. And so my dad, who we rented the house from, went over to our place to check on things just to make sure everything was in order when we were gone. So he gets over there, pulls in, and sure enough, Patty's out on her porch having a dart. And Dad sees first he notices that she has been hard at work setting up a bunch of Christmas lights and decorations on the inside. Through the window he could see, and lights on the outside on the bushes in the house. So she's out there taking a smoke, and Dad walks up and says, "Hey, I really like your Christmas decorations. It looks really good." Trying to start off this conversation in a positive light. And so Patty replies, "Well, it took so long and it was so hard and I'm really worn out now." And so Dad said, "Well, yeah, but at least it's done now and it looks great and you can enjoy it over Christmas." And Patty, without skipping a beat, she says, "Yeah, well, in 2 weeks I'm going to have to take it down." And so Dad told us that story and we kind of had a chuckle. And that's our definition of Patty, really, is just, no matter what was happening, what was going on, she always had a way to look at a situation negatively. And the reason I bring that up is in life, we can do the same thing. There will always be something that's not quite going our way. For some people more than others, we're all in different situations. But I think the point I want to put forward is no matter what our situation is, we are commanded to rejoice in the Lord always, regardless of what's going on around us. So that's our first command. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. So going on, verse 5, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. I want to look at, yes. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. So Paul's again with the rejoicing part. He's saying, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. As people of God, we should be reasonable. We should be able to take things in stride. We're not going to get riled up. We're not going to have a quick temper. We will be people of eternal perspective. We will have a bigger picture and understand the things that really matter in life. And the reason for that is, at the end of verse 5, the Lord is at hand. So this is we have 3 commands and a why. And this is our why. The Lord is at hand, and it ties back to your names are written in the book of life. So if our names are written in the book of life and the Lord is at hand, nothing else on this earth matters. And I can say that with confidence. If you know that the Lord's coming is soon, and you know that you are on the right side of that, everything else kind of fades away. So I want us to, let's see here if I can get to it in my notes. The Lord is at hand. How often do you think of that scene? For me, again, not often. Not often enough. So let's go to Matthew 25, verse 31. And that's just a quick verse to set up that scene. And as I read this, I want you to imagine it in your mind. Matthew 25, verse 31. Let's see. Boy, I'm having trouble today. Okay, picture this in your mind. The final judgment is the heading. Verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So, the Son of Man coming in all of his glory. We have Jesus coming down in his glory. So I mean, we can't imagine how much glory Jesus has, but it's a lot. So try to picture that. I guess probably a lot of light, a lot of sound filling the sky, and then all the angels with him. Not some of the angels, like in some of the other stories in the Bible. All the angels. The Bible tells us that there are 10,000 times 10,000 angels, which, if you do the math, is 100 million. I've never seen 100 million of anything. But when Jesus comes back, he will be coming down, angels with him, filling the sky. And then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another like sheep from goats. So if you can imagine that moment in your mind and think of you as a person being gathered up as part of those nations, I don't know if you can tell me. I wouldn't believe you. Nothing. You can't bring up anything else that matters in that moment other than whether you are part of the sheep or the goats. And I think that's what Paul is saying here. The reason he's bringing it up. This is the biggest moment in history. The Lord is at hand. It's at hand. It's happening at any moment. And so if you're prepared for that, you have nothing else really to be concerned about on earth. And so as we go through these 3 commands that I'm talking about, this is our why. This is why we can have the ability to carry through those commands. The Lord being at hand and us being, our names being written in the book of life is the reason that we can rejoice in the Lord always through any circumstance. It was kind of interesting. Francis Chan recorded this sermon that I listened to in 2009, which is a long time ago. But 2009 was right after the recession. Lots of people were losing their homes to foreclosure or money in the stock market that they had invested, or jobs in some cases if businesses went under. Different things like that. And so for a lot of people, it was a very concerning time and very stressful. And so Francis Chan was saying this passage and this sermon and the message comes right at the perfect time, because everything that we're going through on earth and the turmoil and the stress that people are experiencing, we should be able to have a bigger perspective and rejoice through it. And I just wanted to bring that up. You know, we're in 2020, we're going through it with COVID. And for good reason. We have a lot to be concerned about, a lot to be sad about. A lot of things have happened, and I don't want to take away from that. I don't want to lighten anyone's... I don't want to speak lightly, I guess, of anyone's pain. But I do really want to strongly encourage us to think and to have a bigger perspective, and that this is a command. It's not a fluffy little encouragement on your Sunday. This is a life commitment. And if you're a follower of Jesus, this is something you'll take seriously. Moving on in the passage, verse 6, do not be anxious about anything. And here is our second command. So 3 commands and a why. We've heard our first command, the why, and then our second command is do not be anxious about anything. I always find drinking water is kind of awkward because you're not hearing anything and I'm not saying anything. We're just sort of in silence. But I played basketball in high school. Had a lot of fun with it. Our school, the school that I went to, was an artsy school. We were never very good at athletics. And so I think definitely every season I played was a losing season in basketball. But anyway, in grade 10, it was the very beginning. I'm thinking of a specific story. It was the very beginning of the season. We hadn't played a game yet, and the first game was coming up against a school. And we heard that there was a new player on that team. He was in grade 9, so it was the first time he had played high school basketball. No one had ever seen him play. His name was Jonah.
And we heard that this kid was 6 feet and 11 inches tall, which, if you don't know your heights or don't pay attention to sports, I can just tell you it's very tall. I would be confident in saying that you've probably never seen someone that tall, or if you have, it's been maybe once or twice. Very tall. And I think he was close to 250 pounds. He was big. Usually in high school, a gentleman who is tall like that is very, very skinny just because they've grown really fast and haven't put on any weight. And Jonah he was a monster. According to legend, like I said, we hadn't seen him play. And so we were, as you can imagine, very concerned. We even heard that he had grown so fast that his Achilles tendons in his heels had not grown fast enough with him. And they were actually too short technically for his body height. And so as a result, he kind of tiptoed around because he couldn't put his heels. If you think about the way you walk, when you put your heel down first, when you're walking or running, that stretches out your Achilles tendon, and his hadn't grown or stretched long enough. And so he was running around on the balls of his feet and couldn't, because of that, was a little slower and couldn't jump as high. But like I said, he's 6'11". There was no one even close to that height. And so we were concerned. We were anxious. So, the night comes. It's a home game for us. So we're in the gym early, and we're trying to like warm up, but our eyes are trained on the door to the gym because we want to see, is this guy real? Like, did someone dupe us into some sort of fantasy? But sure enough, close to game time, Jonah comes in, and he is a giant. Everything that was said was true. And we expected to lose even before we had heard of Jonah. But then when we saw him come into the gym, we were like, yep, this one's cooked. Like, we all enjoyed playing. So we're like, well, we'll play the game, but we all know what the outcome is. We were anxious, and rightly so for us, because we had no answer for that. But Paul is saying here, and the connection is a little weak, but I'll admit that. But do not be anxious about anything. We had reason to be anxious as Christians in this passage, and what Paul is saying, don't be anxious. And here's why. Like I said, the Lord is at hand, and we are saved. And that's why we have no reason to be anxious about anything here on earth. And also, imagine if you could carry out this command. If you never worried again, what kind of person you would be. And I think we read some of these commands and we think, that's kind of nice. It's a nice encouragement, but we don't take them seriously often, or at least I don't. So I want to encourage us in that. So our three commands and a why. So we're a third of the way through. Rejoice in the Lord always. Do not be anxious about anything. And then our why that was slipped in there in the middle is the Lord is at hand. So moving on to the end of verse 6. Paul says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. So Paul is saying, as humans, there will be things that we think about, things that we're concerned about, and that's okay. Bring them to God through prayer, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds. Have you ever asked or given a task to someone, or delegated a task to someone who either reported to you at work or, a younger relative or a child, and you give them a task? And what do? You've given them that task, but usually we are wondering, did they do it right? And so you're anxious to check in on them and make sure, or you call them, hey, that thing I told you to do yesterday, did you get it done? How did it go? Has there ever been someone that you gave a task to that you didn't worry about it and you weren't concerned because you knew, the reason for that, I assume, was because you knew this person is trustworthy and you have confidence that whatever you asked them to do was going to be done. And the same way, it should be the same way with God. If we ask God something, if we bring something to God, and then we're still worrying about it and we're still concerned and we're praying next week, oh Lord, I haven't heard what you did. I haven't seen any action. I haven't seen any results. What does that say about our trust in God? We should have full confidence that God hears our prayers and is working, bringing it to him and then saying, you know what, I've put it in God's hands and now it's my job to rejoice, not to be anxious, to be a reasonable person. And the peace of God will guard your hearts if we give things up to God. This is the last kind of thing I want to touch on. If you think about the peace of God and what kind of peace that is, as humans, we have peace usually when we're in control. If you know what your plans are, you know every angle of the situation, and you have a map of what's going to happen, that's when you feel like, you have control of a situation and you are confident and you have peace about what's going to happen. But as soon as something goes out of control or something unexpected comes up, that's when the peace leaves and we're anxious all of a sudden. But if you think from God's level of peace, is God ever not in control? No, absolutely not. There's nothing that God is surprised by. God does not wake up in the morning and think, he doesn't scroll through his phone and get the report on earth and think, what? God's in total control at all times. And so if you think of that and what kind of peace God must have, if you know everything and you're in control of everything, the level of peace is just, off the charts. And Paul is saying, when we tap into that, when we give our requests up to God, we get that peace. It's a supernatural peace. He says it surpasses all understanding. So when people look at us, the children of God, they should be able to say, what kind of peace is this that they have? And how can they have peace during this time? How are they not anxious? How can they be rejoicing? So that's our third command. I guess I didn't call it out when I introduced it, but let your requests be known to God. That's our third command. Rejoice in the Lord always. Do not be anxious about anything, and let your requests be known to God. And the why of that, like I said, is the Lord is at hand. And if our names are written in the book of life, nothing else down here matters. So in closing, I just want to encourage us as a church to do that. When I started thinking about this sermon and what I might talk about, I think in general, especially at Christmas, joy and peace are kind of like fluffy, light, encouraging sort of feelings that come, especially at Christmas, like I said. But as I got into this, I really realized, no, this is a more serious topic, and joy, rejoicing is a part of life as a Christian, and we are commanded to rejoice no matter what the situation. We can rejoice in the Lord. And when we bring our problems to God, bring our issues to God, we can have the peace of God. So thanks for listening. That's how I'll wrap it up. I want to encourage us just as a church, think on that, especially this Christmas season. And then even after Christmas, it's easy to be joyful and peaceful during Christmas when everything is light and cheery. But I want us to remember these are commands that Paul is giving, and we are to take them seriously as a church. So thanks for listening. I will see you guys hopefully on Sunday.